our main topic here on Mastering Dungeons this week, we are going to talk about rules light D&D characters. And this all came from a question from Brooke Matt via our Patreon. And thank you for being a patron, Brooke Matt. And this is a multi-layered question that is going to spawn a lot of talk. And I have all these thoughts and they're not put in any specific order. So
Yep.
we may range far and wide here. So hang in there. But here's the question. First of all, recent Patreon member, longtime listener, great show. Always look forward to the show during my train commute. Well, thank you, Brooke Matt. In episode 229, Shawn muses, do I want a rules light, storytelling focused version of 5e D&D instead of more options or more tactical play, etc.? In this episode, you answered PhD 20's question about removing subclasses. So keeping this discussion on subclasses going, I want to simplify things for a group of casual players, and I've been toying with a few ideas. I either thought of using one, Tasha's sidekicks instead of regular classed characters, or two, let players play a Flea Mortal's retainer, maybe with an extra level 1 power.
Mhm.
I recently purchased the Arora book, Great World and Themes, and got inspired by the character building system there. That gave me idea 3. Take the Arora idea further and also let players choose class powers. That obviously makes it more modular and not really simpler, but it really did get stuck in my head. Maybe to keep things simple, let them only choose the core fantasy powers like Barbarian Rage, a Wizard Spellbook, a Paladin Smite, etc. I guess my question is this. How would you simplify characters and keep it 5e 2014 compatible? How would you do a classless modular character? Uh, so this is like my brain is just firing now after reading this question in all of
Yeah.
these different ways. It sparked all these thoughts, and it's also dovetailing with like things I've been working on recently. So I wanted to use this question in as many parts as a launch point for discussion. But I've talked a lot, Teo, so I want you to step in here if you have anything you want to say. It's sort of to lead us off.
Step back and think about, my advice would start with step back and think about why you're considering this, right? Like, so you're talking about storytelling, lightening the rules. And a great question is always, well, do we want to do that work to modify fifth edition, or will another game work? But I'm going to assume that because of what was asked here, worth saying, I really like so much about what D&D provides. That's what I want to do, right? I don't want to go just to say Shadow Dark or to some other game that has things. But I think it's useful to think about other games in framing the kinds of changes we might do, right? A lot of folks will say, well, Shadow Dark is a really nice simplification of fifth edition. And so we can also look at something like that as inspiration, even if ultimately we want to stick to D&D. And there may be other systems as well. That's the one I'm most familiar with because we covered it on the show and I've played with it, but there are other simpler versions of fifth edition as well that one could look at for that kind of inspiration. Thoughts on that,
Yeah.
Shawn?
Oh, well, yeah. My thought was, yeah, do we really? I mean, I said, do I want one of these? And I think the answer is yes. Do we need it? No. I think the game would be just fine without it. But Shadow Dark just topped $2 million in their latest Kickstarter. So I think there is an audience for it out there.
For sure.
People often say, well, Shadow Dark, it's that the OSR crowd. It's all the old school gamers who are just looking for something. This is anecdotal, but I have met several players in their early 20s who came into D&D with Critical Role, and now they play Shadow Dark. And maybe in addition, like we have a D&D campaign and a Shadow Dark campaign. But there is an audience for this simpler, more streamlined play. And it's not just, grognards. It's
Yeah.
not just folks that grew up on D&D or AD&D. Uh, and of everything that I've written for 5e, including third-party publishers or Wizards of the Coast, the one that I've gotten the most questions about, the one that I've seen the most chatter about online, is not Acquisitions Incorporated. It's not Grim Hollow. It's not Descent into Avernus. it's Peril in Pinebrook. It's this, teach people how to play game,
Yeah.
because so many people are asking right now, how can I or my friends or my kids get into D&D without having any prior knowledge? And it's that way. It's that simplified version of this game that needs to be this stepping stone into it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think of these the lighter systems and what they can do for us because it often, as you said, mimics what a new player thinks about, right? High concept, a few
Mhm.
mechanics to support it, and then just get right into what you want to do, which is interact with the world, right? If the appeal of these games, role playing games, is the idea that we can do whatever we come up with, right? We know that's not entirely true, but I can interact with this world, I can be a hero, I can do cool things. A lot of that's around that interaction, right? I want to topple the barrel. I want to convince the rogue to work on with us instead of against us. Those things don't require a ton of class features. Now we do also love, and I think of Jamie and his Psychology of D&D book. We also
Mhm.
want a sense of competence, and competence
Right.
can come from that securing of what our character does. And that's often why we end up with all these structures. Structures also around our character also convince us of not just our mastery, but our investment that we've made in the character, right? So I think, if I pick an answer of why fifth edition 2024 has more stuff, right? The answer I'm hearing is because this creates investment in your character.
Mhm.
And it's what D&D does. And yeah, we see that Shadow Dark's going lighter, but what D&D does is give you this great payoff for the investment you made in your character because you took this feat and you did that thing and that subclass and all of that. And that is an important thing to consider when you're choosing an alternative. Will people not care about their character? I can say that when I ran Shadow Dark in the gauntlet mode, which is supposed to be a meat grindery kind of thing, that amount of meat grinding of having characters die, I think we had, I don't know, 12, 20, I don't know, a lot of characters, at least a dozen characters died. They ended up with no investment in them, right? And that's what sometimes these features that you have are trying to add. So you want to try to find that sweet spot of
Mhm.
clear concepts, so you focus on the interaction with the game, but something there that keeps you feeling like, yeah, this is my character and I care about it.
Yeah. And so what Teos has been talking about is sort of the psychological investment
Mhm.
that you make into characters. There's also a mathematical side of this
Mhm.
equation that I'm going to talk about. So bear with me here, uh, because I'm about to talk about math. So I apologize for bringing math into this. I apologize to all the true mathematicians out there for the mistakes I'm going to make, the vagaries I'm going to invoke. I am pushing all of this in your direction as a hopeful way to explain why it's just not a matter of let's make a simpler character.
Mhm. Mhm.
So one of the most recognizable parts of D&D is this icosahedron, right? It's that 20-sided die. When I teach the game or when I show people about the hobby, right, I've got three literally sitting right in front of me. One,
Yeah.
two, three, and they're the same type Teos has.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, when I hand these to people for the first time, there is almost something primal about their reaction. There's something like archetypical. There's something in the lizard brain of people that see this funky die and they just want to roll it and they want to look at it. And it's magical. It's a part of D&D that is iconic. As a randomizer, it is terrible. It is as something that's supposed to determine outcomes and drive narration based on those
Mhm.
outcomes. It's so bad compared to the math behind Fate with its smaller numbers and its bell curve -4 to +4 with 0 being the most rolled result.
Yeah.
It's terrible compared to Powered by the Apocalypse games with the 2d6 system,
Mhm.
with its sort of 2d12 curved
Yep.
results. where you're going to be rolling 7, more than any other number. So the math itself right there, the swingy D20 versus these curved things where you can better control the outcomes. Now look at those games and the currency that they have in order to be able to ensure or better suppose that you will succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The fate points of fate, where you get to basically decide, do I really want to succeed here?
Yeah.
Because I have ways of spending this currency to do so. The Powered
Yeah.
by the Apocalypse, success with a cost.
Mm-hmm.
If you mathematically, if you are playing a character with you have a +2 proficiency bonus in D&D and a +2 to your ability score. So you've got a +4 to your roll.
Mm.
Say that's it, and you're rolling a D20 and you're trying to hit AC 14. That's a 50-50 shot, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a 50-50 chance of succeeding. If you go to the Powered by the Apocalypse game, if you have a +2 to the stat that you're about to roll, we'll say Dungeon World. Okay, you have +2 to the stat. So to get at least a success with a consequence sort of result, you need a 5 on 2d6 added together. You're going to succeed 83% of the time. So right there, you have 83% of the time you will at least get something with your Dungeon World roll. 50-50 with D&D. 50-50 isn't great. D&D can't have that be the case. So what do they have to do? They have to put ways into the game for you to get advantage. They have to put ways into the game for you to up that roll somehow. Magic items, spells, feats, traits, everything goes in to get that roll from 50% up to more in the 75% range, right? Get a +5 in there somehow. All right, advantage, rolling 2d20s instead. That's roughly +4. So that we're almost there. Now we'll throw in a feat. We'll throw in this. We'll throw in that. We'll throw in a magic item. All right, now we're in that 75-80% range where we really, really want the game to be. So in order to do that, though, you're adding complexity to the game. You're adding feats. You're adding class features. You're adding all of these things. So what am I trying to get at, Teos? What I'm trying to get at is you take all that complexity out of the game. Great. Now it's easier to play. But all of that math that relies on those other things going into it, now you're playing a game that you're not succeeding as much as you should. Right. So you need to adjust everything else to make that work.
Yeah, and when we talked about removing subclasses, an astute listener on YouTube commented something similar, where they said, you're going to have to add something back in for those features because those features are doing work. And they're right. There is that math work that's being done by these various features. But we can, so I think your point's really important. Like, you can't just remove everything and say, hey, no problem, right? But both psychologically and mathematically. I mean, I'm reminded of Jeremy Crawford in one of his blogs saying sort of like, I can't believe that people care so much about which ancestry or, back then race they're choosing. It's just, a plus blah. And it's like, are you kidding me? Have you met players? Players love their plus, 2. I mean, it's sacred to them. They won't, most players, I think really it's most players will not consider taking a suboptimal race back when that was the way 5th edition was done. It's that important to them, and they are in the business of collecting these pluses, right? And so we
the game teaches them that. Right?
Indeed.
The game teaches them that you need every single one of these.
Yeah, it does. It does say, like, if be this, if you're this character class, choose this ancestry. It even tells you things like that. And so we need to understand that motivation of it, that players do love this kind of thing, and you want to give them some ability to have that when they're making their characters. Because otherwise, you have to do a lot of work elsewhere to feel good about the game. And you may be a DM that you will give them that, right? So if you're the kind of DM that you could say, hey, everybody is a paper sack. We're blowing about in the world. Let's role play. You have no stats, and we're never going to have stats. And you could have a great time. Well, great. You will probably also have a great time when you have a few stats, right? Because you're that good a DM and your players are that good at being players. that you will just have fun. Not everybody's like that, especially the new player that's trying to, learn RPGs for the first time and wants to get into it, and the DM that's trying to figure out how to reward it. D&D does a lot of work to give you all those bits that are going to make you feel good. And so if you remove that structure and you're simplifying down, you must both mathematically, there's a word, mathematically account for what you remove, but also, pleasure brain center type account for it as well. So we can collapse features down and give them, and in fact, we could end up in better places, right? Like one of the things I love about Shadow the Demon Lord is it has 10 levels.
Mm-hmm.
It spaces out. It gives you the feeling that everything's spaced out more in terms of getting a little something each level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's simplifying the game down, but still giving you something. And a lot of times that something has a strong story expression, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like at level 4, you're getting another ancestry feature.
Mm-hmm.
And so that reinforces, hey, don't forget that you're a dwarf. Don't forget that you're being made of clockwork. You could choose to be more dwarfy right now, or more clockworky, or whatever your creature is, more orc. Or you could take this kind of a feature instead, if that's important to you. And you're adding to your story, right? And you get another novice level power. So that idea that you're learning wizardry, well, you could get another spell now. Or you could take this other thing, right? But it's it's like usually an A-B choice. And there's a story component to it so that you feel that mastery over your game, that reinforcement of I know who I am and I'm making choices, but it's not intruding, right? It's not a huge thing. And I think, when we look at subclasses, and there was a recent show I was sharing how I was listening to this video and it's talking about the Artificer. And I just couldn't believe that for this long they were talking about what the subclass did for you. Because there were so many features and the features were so meaty that it just went on and on and on. And clearly has gone deeper than a simple character worth of features for your class, right?
Yeah. And for me, all of this ties back to sort of new players coming into the game. Because when you're a new player, there's really two things that are important to you. It's creating your character, assuming that you are coming to the game with a thought in mind of this is the persona I want to take on while I play, and then playing the game as that character. And the problem is creating the character before the game starts puts you in a position where you don't know what you're doing. And so you fall back on the non-math things. If we go back to the Monty Cook thing, right? You fall back on non-math things. And unfortunately, these have to translate into math things. So you say, well, I want to be a smooth talking fighter who makes poor decisions, but then is able to get out of trouble using charm and my skill with the sword. So you play a fighter. And you're okay, the DM says, okay, you're a fighter. And now these are your ability scores. And strength is important for you because if you want to wear armor or you want to do a lot of damage, you need a high strength. But you want to be smooth talking, so charisma is important. But what about constitution? What about dexterity, right? All of these things. So you have to start explaining as the game master all of these things where the person just wants to play a smooth talking fighter whose poor decision making gets them in trouble. And so as the DM, the person teaching the game, you might say, well, really what they want to play is a rogue because they also just said that they don't want to wear like big plate armor. So you might say, well, really what you want to play is a rogue or really what you want to play is a ranger. But then you have to start explaining why, right? And it's so interwoven, it's so locked that it's just hard to even break the surface of it.
No, it absolutely is. You're absolutely right. It's all so linked, and so we have to be really careful when we want to simplify 5th edition how we pull out the concept of the character and which parts we retain, right? And I would assume that here, our question is being asked of what can I easily subtract without modifying the entire game, right? Because we could modify 5th edition to change away from, say, the characteristics, right? Because it's totally true. And what ends up happening, right, is if I say I want to be the super charismatic fighter, but without having high charisma, And you might say, well,
Mhm.
why don't you take, a feature that we'll call way with words. And so whenever you're negotiating, you get some great bonus, right? But then you have somebody else who says, well, I'm building a rogue diplomat.
Mhm.
And I've put all this work into having a high charisma score. Are you saying I don't need to do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm reminded of a not simple game at all called Shadowrun. And I was reading one of the editions of Shadowrun, and I forget which one it was. It might have been fifth. I think it was fifth edition. And I had to go on a forum and I'd say, if I'm right, I can hack using just my gear, like nothing to do with me. Make
Mhm.
all these rolls just based on the gear. Or I can, and that's by like just letting the gear, I give it instructions, I let it do its thing. Or I can partly jump into the thing in virtual reality. And now I use this skill and a little bit of gear. Or I can fully go into virtual reality and now I'm using entirely different skills and not using the gear. And I said, is this correct? And they're like, yeah, dude, you're correct. But that's a nightmare because it means there are
Mhm.
three entire ways I can build my character. It also means
Mhm.
someone can just buy gear and be better than me, no matter
Mhm.
how much I've worked on my character. And
Yeah.
right, like when the game gets that way, it becomes disappointing. It gets so complicated, but it's trying to reward so much that then some person comes along and goes, "Well, I just have expensive gear. I'm better than you."
Mhm.
Or,
Yep.
"Well, I'm just a charismatic fighter. It doesn't matter what my charisma is. I just got a feature," and that would be a problem too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's jump to the question about the Aurora trait system, uh, which was designed by Scott Gray for specifically for Aurora, where there are no species per se.
Mhm.
Everyone is an amalgamation of many different traits. So you build your character through choosing a number of points and then spending those points on these particular traits. There's still a class system, so you would use regular D&D classes, but that's what the trait system does. And I think it's fun. I
Mhm.
think you can do lots of neat things with it, but it's not simple. Uh, it is
And in what way, for
eh,
folks who don't know the system, how is it still complicated?
well, it's still complicated because you still have to choose the traits that you want to represent your character's species, even though it's not a species, right? Your character's
Hmm.
physical, their upbringing, their attributes, the sort of heritage
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
Uh, so you would, depending on the sort of campaign, the game master can decide how many points you get to spend. And we've made the traits into combat traits, role playing traits, and exploration traits. So if
Yeah.
you want to, so you could have like three of each, 3 points in each set. So you'd end up with either 9 traits, or you can spend 2 points on a trait to get an enhanced version of it. And then you can lower or raise that number of points depending on what sort of campaign you want. So that is rather than just getting a template with your species and your heritage,
Hmm.
you get to choose.
Building it
And
up.
we put in, if you want to play a typical dwarf, you don't need to spend points, just use these particular traits.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you can do a lot with that system. You could say, as the game master, well, if you want to play a dwarf, you start with these 3 traits always, and now you get to choose these other 5 traits.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, so you could play around with it, but it's still choosing, making a choice out of a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
options. So it's not as simplified. Scott also made the Core 20 role playing game, which takes this one step further, and it gets rid of classes.
Hmm.
So as the question asks, can I make a classal system? Yes, you could also play Scott's Core 20 role playing
Yeah.
game, where you get a certain number of points, and you choose not your species traits, but your feats.
Hmm.
And these feats cover everything that a class would normally do. So you can build, pick, choose to get the exact character that you want.
Yeah.
But again, it's not simpler uh,
Yeah.
unless you tweak it in a way that you are building things one step at a time. And this is would have been my final suggestion, but you go first, Teos.
Well, I'll make us where my brain would go. assuming, and this is a big assumption, that I have players that want to play with this and find out, right? Mess
Right.
around, find out, is this fun?
Mhm.
And if I had their buy-in, like, let's try a simpler system. Let's know that we're doing kind of version 1, and we will tweak down the
Mhm.
road as we go. So here's what I would want to do: build a chassis of a class, right? Take something like the rogue, the fighter, and think about, what does the class sort of just need to do as what we can call being like your hero structure.
Mhm.
Put that together and add pieces where you see classes sort of normally doing, like, there's you got to get a cool thing here. Then
Mhm.
you've got to add, and Shadow the Demon Lord, this is too. You have to add some sort of thing here that colors you in some way. You could think about it
Mhm.
the way that what we're hearing about the starter set might work. And we've kind of talked about this idea of like, hey, I'm a hero, but I'm going to add this little card that says, and I'm a cleric, right? So some
Mhm.
ability to dial in a thing, right? That
Mhm.
gives you that pieces. And then, some other bits that like give you color to your character. So if you think about like that idea of I want to be a negotiator or something like that, how
Mhm.
would you get that, right? If you're using skills, maybe it's a skill package, right? Of giving you boost to that. Um, maybe you have proficiency baked in, maybe you don't. Maybe it's just some skills are not great, some are really, really good. You could play with that, right? But that idea of building what a central chassis is, and then what are you adding onto it at various levels to make choices. And like you said, you start playing and see how that's feeling, right? Are we
Yeah.
are you feeling competent? Are you feeling simple enough? Am I destroying you in combats? Is it the other way around?
Mhm. Yeah. And my answer was very similar to Teos's, but I think even slower. So my answer to can we have a 5e simplified system would be yes, with some careful tinkering, not just to the characters, but to the challenges. So what I would do is I would start with everyone is exactly the same, except for A, B, and C. A is you get to choose to add a +2 to one ability, a +1 to another ability, and that's it. So you can decide if you
Mhm.
want to be strong, dexterous, you know, hardy, etc. Put a +2 in that. Put a +1 in one of these other ones. Maybe even put a -1 in one for the flavor. Uh, so that's A. B is choose one skill that you're good at
Mhm.
of these list of skills. All right, boom, you're going to put your proficiency bonus in there. And C might be one special ability. Maybe this is a trait from this list of traits. So not only, you have this and boom, you're there. Everyone's going to do a d6 of damage.
Mhm.
Everyone is going to be +5 to their attack rolls at this first stage.
Right.
That's it. And we're going to play a session. Very simplified session. 2 hours at most, maybe two combats at most,
Kick the
lots of role
tires.
playing. Yeah, lots of role playing, lots of skill checks, ability checks that are very simple. We're all good with that. Everybody have fun. Everybody get the gist of what we're doing. Okay, cool. Now you're level blank, 2, however you want to say it. Okay, now we're going to add these things. And now we're in Shadow of the Demon Lord territory where
Hmm.
now choose an occupation. All right,
Yeah.
this occupation will give you not a set thing, but a choice of 3 things.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
So instead of, okay, you're taking your occupation of fighter, rather than saying you get armor bonus, weapon, but choose one of two of these 4 things, very limited scale, uh, and add those to your character. Now we're going to play and continue the adventure. Oh, we're done with that. Now add 2 things.
Hmm.
And again, it can be a choice
Right.
rather than just a package, but
But it's a small menu, and yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
make the menu small, make it tailored to things that the players probably want their characters to be good at.
Yeah. And a way you can do that is you can look at, a level 1 character in 5th edition 2024 or 2014, what you want, whatever you want as your basis, and think, what is it that I've removed? And kind of how powerful is that? What's the sort of math that it's doing? So how can I
Right.
dial that back in a different way that's simpler, right?
Yep.
And collapse that all together, right? Normally you'd have a feat and you'd have, the benefit that your ancestry gives you and the ability score bonus. So it all needs to come in a different way that's simpler
Yep.
and come up with that structure. And so it's essentially the same thing as you end up having that like chassis that you're working off of, and you've
Yeah.
removed things, so you need to add it back in some other way that is simpler and then hopefully story or rich, right? Yeah.
Mhm. And through that method, you will get to a semi-complex character. You'll just get to that at a time when the players, assuming they're new, are actually ready to use them. And the challenges, if you keep them simpler at first, will become more difficult exactly when the players and their characters are ready to take on those more difficult challenges.
Yeah, a tough question you have to answer with this is around spellcasters. Because one of the things that D&D has increasingly done, but did not do in its early days, in the early days, you would have magic missile and your darts.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was really simple. It was not much more complicated than I have my sword as a fighter. I'm a rogue and I backstab, right? It wasn't very different. But as we started increasing that number of spells to where you have all of these options, even a level 1 character is just daunting, right? And I've shared before, I've had young players in my home games who I have to constantly remind, by the way, you have some amazing spells, and their clerics just hitting everybody with their hammer. And even after I kind of pointed out, they would go back to just hitting with their hammer because it was just so hard for them to wrap their minds around all these spells. And so you have to think about that too, of what do you want to do with spellcasters, because they're inherently more complicated than everyone else. So it could be people who want complicated are spellcasters, and you just deal with that. Or you have to figure out how to simplify it, but not then have spellcasting feel like it's now shackled, right? Like if you think about detect magic and all these kinds of spells, what do you do? 4th edition had an answer for that. You have utility spells versus attack spells, and you get certain numbers of each, and now you can dole it out. And as you get higher level, you don't get more. You have to replace. And that is a way to do it, right? To keep down that level of complexity, where at some point you're going to have to swap some things out. And that's up to you.
Yep.
Or upgrade it, right? Is another way of doing
Yep.
it too. You have fireball, you got to be high enough level. Now you can upgrade your fireball, but you can't have 19 offensive spells because that's too much.
Yep. And to go along with that spellcasting, healing becomes important, because that, especially 5th edition, expects lots of healing spells, healing, resting. So you might need to adjust how resting works. So instead of an hour short rest, you may need to say, if you take a 10-minute rest, i.e. 3rd or 4th edition, 10-minute short rest, you get back some hit points,
I think
because
4E
we
did
want
that.
the narrative to work with this. So, right, all of these things need to be like a tariff, carefully calibrated, carefully adjusted, and not just gone at with a sledgehammer.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. It's a fun, it makes me want to do this. It makes me want to have the time to actually try this out. And you've had the pleasure of doing this for Peril and Pinebrook.
Yeah. And again, I think it worked for the audience that it was for, but I could see, more, I don't want to say older, because there are many young players who have the maturity and the understanding of mechanics to be able to play 5th edition straight up without things. But, there needs to be a way to scratch that psychological itch, like you talked about, of I am super competent and I can really do a lot of different things, versus the simplicity of being able to understand how it all works together.
Yeah. I wish that 2024 could have embraced some of the modularity goals that 2014 had to actually enable it a little more rather than less, which is what it feels like it's done. It's really baked itself into being complex. And we talked about why earlier, but because I agree with you. There's an audience for that I think wants to play, as we see in this question. I want to play D&D. I really love what it's offering. I want to be part of the community, but I'd like to have some options here. And it's hard with the way 5th edition is put together in 2024 to extract that out in a simple way. And by virtue of it, third-party companies that are doing it, right? Whether it's Grant Ward, who's doing Grant Ward's doing the 100 Dungeons, right? Like
Right.
these are all really fun systems, but they require you to be okay with playing something slightly different, right?
Sure.
And how different you go depends, but it's got to be something different legally.
Yes.
Right. The more that you're going to really make a published work off of it and possibly have more on top of it. So that is a challenge because you wish that there were an official way to streamline it down. I don't know. Are we calling for 5th edition essentials? Is it time?
It's for me, it's always been time. But that's a whole different story for a whole different episode. So thank you for that question, Brooke Matt. And thank you all for listening and putting up with our nonsense.
Yeah.
Brooke Matt was a patron, and you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd and becoming a Master of Dungeon supporter. Thank you for everyone who's already done that. By becoming a Master of Realms supporters who get a shout out here in our show notes, and our Masters of the Multiverse who get their names mangled in real time by none other than Shawn. So, Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops, Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Dave Bastiansen, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Calvin Bridges of Alos, Robo Ballin, Kevin Criswell, welcome, Dead Inertia DM, Evil John, Evan at Nimble Co., Will Doyle, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com, James Fisher, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, William Harshman of Runeforge Tabletop Gaming, Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, Sean Hurst, Hyperlexic, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, The Mighty Jerd, JR of The Twilight Perspective, Brian King, Jim Klingler, Chad Lunch, Paul Mata, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Trey McLemore, John Mickey, Mighty Zeus, Sean Molly, Falcon Neil, Tom Nelson, creator of the Deck of Player Safety, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Phil Wirt from Page, the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, Philip and Lindsay, Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Pugnus, Ozymandias Rex, Runner Rick, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Andy Shockney, Krishna Samosa, Tim Smith, Spark from Dunor Games, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Tres, Joe Tyler, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, James Walton, Graham Ward, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Javier Waziak, Chris Webster, Zach Types, and Walt Winfrey. Thank you so much for your support, one and all. And again, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also help out by leaving us a review via Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this show, or go to YouTube and click that fancy subscribe button. Give us some likes, give us some comments. Let us know what you think. We appreciate the help. Teos, speaking of help, where can people find your helpful articles?
Find me at alphastream.org. I most recently talked about my look back at the Dungeon Master's Guide and what I liked and what I would want in a future version, based on kind of, what it did well and what I would have liked to see improved about it. So find me at alphastream.org. Shawn, where do we find you?
You can find me on the show's socials at Shawn Merwin, and you can follow the podcast at Mastering D&D on all of those same socials. And again, the YouTube channel at Mastering Dungeons, find us there all the time. Lots of legacy content there that you can go back and take a listen to. So we have simplified characters in D&D, even if we have not simplified D&D itself. With that in mind, Teos, what are we going to do now?
I'm going to petition, I'm going to sue the NCAA until we get a simpler basketball game that only allows my team to win. It seems fair.
Sounds good. And I am going to roll these wonderful 20-sided dice and see what numbers I get. Crit 19 and 10. So
What?
I'm liking my chances here, Teos.
You've clearly invented a superior, simpler game.
Indeed.
Crowdfunding ahead.
Yep.